Hi, my name is Nora Gelprin. I'm with Advocates for Youth. Thanks for joining us as we review culturally responsive instruction when teaching sex education. Let's start with a definition of what culturally responsive teaching is, provided for us by Geneva Gay, so we can just kind of reflect on what it really entails. We also know that it allows us to be more effective because it makes our teaching more meaningful for our students, therefore, it's more interesting for them, and that it allows them to learn more easily and thoroughly. So, thanks to Geneva Gay and her colleagues for doing such great work on this, which we're really citing and using for much of today's presentation. One of the other parts of culturally responsive teaching is that we know that it really requires the educator to be really aware and have reviewed their own values, beliefs, and attitudes, and how those really intersect with power and privilege. It's not something you can understand by watching a TED Talk or even just by completing these quick tutorial. It really requires ongoing reflection and examination. Generally, there are four steps in how to be a more culturally responsive educator. We'll review each of these with you one at a time in a little bit greater detail. So let's get started. Step one is really learning about your students' culture and the cultural components that they bring into your classroom. We know that culture really is a wide variety of influences, including their attitudes, beliefs, behaviors, and values, and those can come from a wide variety of places. They can really impact on their relationships in their family, with their friends, with romantic partners, things related to how they express their identity, what they've learned about their gender and gender role expectations, and same with faith and faith tradition. So lots of things impacting your students' culture and their understanding of their culture. It can also really help for educators to reflect on their own cultural assumptions and values. There's some really great self assessments that are easily available online that allow you to really reflect on what was your own cultural heritage, what were beliefs you were taught about health and well being, what's your knowledge about sexuality, where did that come from, and what were you taught about gender and gender roles. I'd really encourage you to check one of those out because it can lead to some really terrific reflection and deeper understanding of ourselves as educators and what we're bringing into the classroom. Step three is to get to know the individual young people in your classroom. I'm guessing many of you have lots of ways of doing this every day. We know that you really want to look at the cultural beliefs, attitudes, and behaviors and how those impact sexuality, communication, their beliefs about families and relationships. Really important to not reinforce stereotypes and to be aware of different biases as they pop up in your classroom. Lastly, step four is to really understand how those cultural backgrounds really focus in on sexuality, because sometimes they seem a little bit disjointed. But really recognizing things like historical trauma, being part of an oppressed group with a history of racism or oppression, how that can really show up in someone's interest and capacity and willingness to seek care. Also connected to their sexual decision making, stuff related to their faith tradition, the economic circumstances that they grew up in, all those things really impact issues related to sexuality in a very broad way. We see those often showing up in rates related to public health indicators such as unintended pregnancy, rates of sexually transmitted diseases, including HIV, even things around barriers to learning about sexuality, and how it can certainly have negative impacts and not allow everyone equality in the resources they have access to in order to be successful and thrive. So, how does this really connect to teaching sex education? Well, if we look at the National Teacher Prep Standards for Sexuality Education, we see it's one of the indicators in there. I'll let you read that on your own, including all of those categories down at the bottom. So, when we're teaching sex education, these are some of the things that we really want to keep in mind. We want to keep in mind that if our students represent, even if they're all in ninth grade or seventh grade, they represent a real wide range of developmental levels. I'm sure you've experienced that. And oftentimes, what we're teaching may be in conflict with what they're learning at home. So, that can create some tension for students. It's also important that we use data to really inform what lesson plans we're choosing, what grade levels we're using those at, to make sure that our instruction is really meeting the needs of our students. Also, never to lose sight of the fact that one of the most important influencers of young people are other young people and the perception of social norms around youth culture. Particularly regarding young people of color, it's really important for us to be aware of issues related to language and what is a student's native language. Also, are some of these topics considered forbidden at home? When we look at the visuals that we're using, some of the different things that are hanging in our room and the things we're using in our lesson plans, do those really represent a wide variety of young people in terms of skin tones, in terms of body shapes and sizes, in terms of differing abilities? Also related to students who identify as lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, or questioning, and a whole range of identities. We really know it's important to foster that safe environment by making sure to intervene in any episode of harassment that we may witness or overhear. Also, to make sure that transgender and gender expansive students have opportunities to choose where they're going to go if we are required to offer single sex classes. We want to make sure to be interacting with them with their true gender identity, even if that may be different from some of our school records, and making sure that even if you don't know or aren't aware of students in your own class who have these identities, please know for sure that they have family members or friends in their community that hold these identities. So we need to be aware of that at any given time. So here's a couple of quick examples. The first may be to be a more culturally responsive educator, could be something as simple as inviting in people who are living with HIV to talk about what their lives are like living with this infection and how things like stigma and shame can prevent people from going to get tested or getting the health care that they need to keep themselves well and healthy. It could be a simple activity of having students really reflect on the different messages that they've gotten from all these different places in their lives, and then allowing them to talk to each other so that they can compare and contrast that and see how all of these things really influence their understanding of sexuality. Lastly, here are some great resources for ongoing learning to perhaps do some further reading to really think about how culture and sexuality are so intertwined. There's some great resources even from the National Association of Elementary School Principals and the National Center for Culturally Responsive Educational Systems. So thanks so much for participating today. We hope that this review has been helpful for you.